Hi, this is Jenny Walterman, and this is my case study for course EDL 855. It's Module 9. Case summary of key people involved in this scenario is Richard Inman. He's the assistant principal at Rocket Junior High. James, who is a 15-year-old student from the South Side, which is also where Mr. Inman is from. David Ramos, a 13-year-old student. He's an honor student, and it mentions that he's also a band student and smaller than James. The fifth period teacher, who goes unnamed, is a teacher of James. SRO officer, who is also unnamed, James's mom and David's mom. James's mom is essentially kind of fed up with her son getting in trouble. David's mom is upset that he got in trouble, and both parents react a little differently. They are both unnamed in this case study. And the director of secondary education, who is also unnamed. Some of the key facts in this case, we'll start with the assistant principal, Richard Inman, and go from there. So he's a first year teacher in this position. It's the spring of the school year. He's from the south side of town, just like James, as I mentioned on the previous slide. He has particular goals for making connections and building relationships with the tough group of students from the south side, of which James is the clear leader of the group. He has worked with James all year and saw previous improvement, but is now dealing with some tardiness issues. He's had 3 tardies in this 1 week alone. He has summoned James to his office to discuss the recent tardiness. And after being summoned, James's teacher called to report witnessing suspicious activity in the hallway, an exchange between James and David. She reports that James gave David something. She didn't see what it was, but she suspected that it was drugs. And so Mr. Inman thinks about what to do and then decides to have the SRO officer escort both students to his office, and includes the SRO officer in the initial discussion, search, and investigation of what has transpired between the two students. And this is a decision he later regrets. And so the SRO officer finds a weapon. He finds a weapon. Sorry. The SRO officer finds a weapon, which is brass knuckles. It's not approved to be on the school grounds and is considered a felonious possession. And so he insists on filing a report for both students, handcuffs them both, and takes them to the juvenile detention center. He informs Richard that he needs to expel both students for 45 days, and that's a result of the district's zero tolerance policy. Mr. Inman does not want to suspend or expel David, and make him be subjected to the alternative education program, the alt school, for the district, and is afraid that that environment will have a negative impact on David. David leaves with the SRO officer to go to the juvenile detention center and is in tears, upset about the situation. And Mr. Inman decides to tear up the suspension form and wants to allow David to return to school. Um, After he allows him to come to school, we'll come to that part of the story in a moment. But about a week after David's been back in school, Mr. Inman is instructed to proceed with the expulsion or suspension of David, and um, have him go back over to the alt school. Okay, so on the right side of the screen, our SRO officer that's unnamed, he's the one that escorted the students to the office. He searched both students. He finds brass knuckles on David. He seizes the weapons, arrests both students for federal possession of a prohibited weapon on school grounds. James is the student from south side of town. He admits his responsibility in the situation and essentially absolves David, which is a source of pride for Mr. Inman. James did make some bad decisions, but he also was trying to prevent another student from having to be in trouble for his decisions. He's essentially unaffected by the 45-day sentence at the alt school. Upon calling parents, James's mother, she's decides that she's just going to let him stay in the juvenile detention center for a few days and not rush right down there and get him. Just kind of let him stew in his own juices, so to speak. David is the smaller student, the honor student. He's in band. He cries under the stress of a forced situation. He was essentially bullied into this situation. James admits that he said he would cause harm to David if he didn't do what he said. In fact, the entire scenario is presupposed by the fact that James said he needed to have the brass knuckles because he was going to deal with the situation after school that day. And so, certainly violent intentions by James towards a couple of different people were stated in that day. David's mother, upon being notified of the incident and arrest, immediately follows up with the principal and the juvenile facility. She's very upset with Mr. Inman over how he handled the situation when David was clearly bullied and probably manipulated into this situation. And then we have the district director of secondary education who calls Mr. Inman about a week after David has returned to school, tells him that he needs to enforce the established policies, comply, and suspend David or face a formal reprimand in his personal file. So let's go on to the second section, which is discussing case issues. So we'll talk about some legalities and ethical conflicts that may be in place. So on the left side, legal issues and any questions. This regarding the school policy, the zero tolerance policy, is the alt school appropriate for first time offenders? And it doesn't allow for individual student assessment of situations, and there's no allowance for intimidation or bullying scenarios in the zero tolerance policy. The district director instructing Richard to suspend David and also preventing potential lawsuits for discrimination might be a part of the legal issues driving that decision. And then the SRO officer treating the two students at the same time, regardless of historical context, also searching them both in presence of each other, speaking with them both in the presence of each other, were some questionable legal issues that I had questions about. Over on the right, the ethical conflicts regarding Mr. Inman. His involvement of the SRO officer prior to knowing the facts of the case is a potential ethical conflict. The refusal to allow established school policy and changing his mind, ripping up the form, deciding not to fill it out for David is an ethical conflict because he's not following the established policies and procedures for his district and building. It's inconsistent for him to not follow the established school policies because James has been suspended, but David was not. So there's potential, maybe an ethical question mark on that about the inconsistency of the way the two boys were treated. And then the refusal to send David to the alt school in direct conflict with his supervisor is another ethical conflict that's facing Mr. Inman. For David, there's no prior offenses. It's kind of reported as a bullying situation, which is admitted to by James, that he pressured him to hold that weapon, and then they went directly from the hallway to the principal's office. So, was there really even time for David to report this and do the right thing before he started to be interrogated or questioned about it? So, those are some ethical situations I see with David. And then regarding the SRO officer treating the two separate students at the same time, regardless of historical context, and then searching both students in the same room is another question I have about ethical morality issues. And then, has any harm occurred? Well, for David, his school record has mental health and potential physical safety if he goes to the alt school. Richard, his job security by not following policies. And then the district director, his job security by not seeing the individual situation that's happening here and seeing policy above people. So, case statement in one sentence or less. It was really hard to put all of this in here behind one period, but I will read it in its for sure a run-on sentence. But Richard, a first-year assistant principal at Rocket Junior High School, is facing an ethical and moral dilemma of whether or not to comply with his boss's instructions and suspend both students instead of just one, after the actions and reactions of two very different students in the school prompt the SRO to charge both students with felonious possession of a forbidden weapon on school grounds, even though one of the students was bullied into being in possession of the weapon and now faces suspension, 45 days at the alt school, and potential harm to his physical, mental, and educational self. All right, so the next section is discussing any missing facts, what we do know and what we don't know. So, regarding the people in the case, we know about Richard, James, and David. What we don't know is the name of the reporting teacher, what her skin in the game is, and any kind of history she might have with James and David. We also don't know the name of the SRO officer or his history with students and interacting with students in the building. We don't know the names of both mothers, their ethnicity, their cultural background, their educational background, where they live in town, any of that information. And we also don't know the name and background situation of the director of secondary ed. Regarding the place, we know this took place at Rocket Junior High. We know that the size of the student body is 900 students at that junior high. We know that the incident happened in a school highway or hallway. We don't know the name of the town. We don't know where Southside is. We don't know where the juvenile detention center is or the alt school. We don't know the size of the community and where all of these locations are in reference to each other. Okay. And then any program known and unknown facts. So the known facts are that we know it's a junior high school. We know it's public education. It has an established discipline plan and established district policies. We know that there's an alternative ed facility for suspended students of the zero tolerance policy. There's unknown situations, which is that there's no mention of any SPED or established behavior plan for James or David. No mention of why Mr. Inman is being forced to suspend David and send him to the alt school, what the motivation for the district director of secondary education, what his motivation is in forcing that issue. No mention of why Mr. Inman is so against David going to the alt school, and no mention of what measures have been taken so far this year with helping build relationships and help the undesirable behaviors of the Southside group. So, reviewing our priorities, the prioritized information as I see it is this question mark about following established policies no matter what. That's a big glaring question mark for me. And then investigating any potential fight situation after school that James mentioned. I mean, he brought the brass knuckles to school because he's out to teach somebody a lesson. And so we need to really address that and make sure that all students are able to come to school and learn in a safe environment and that all of our students feel safe. And then we need to follow up on David's choice to potentially conceal the brass knuckles, or was it allowing time to disclose information? Like, was he concealing it, or was it not given time to address it? That's a priority that needs to be investigate and peel the layers back on that. So that part of that is determining if it was bullying or a cover-up. And then informing parents of the district policies. When is the appropriate time to inform and follow through on policies? And when do we have autonomy to not follow a policy based on unique situations with students? And then proposing a change to the zero tolerance policy to reflect nuance in varying situations so that we're seeing the student and we're seeing people before we see policy. The key stakeholders here, I've already mentioned their names before, but it's part of the assignment requirements. So, Assistant Principal Mr. Inman, building personnel and students, district and school board, potential division between diverse populations in the community, mentions the South Side, which is we can infer as a rougher side of town. So, South Side versus North Side, if we're treating one student one way and a student from another part of town a different way. So, it could be impacting those key stakeholders. It could impact David and his family, James and his family, the SRO officer, and the juvenile detention center, and then the alt school as well. Um, Questions. Could this conflict be damaging to the community? And I said yes, it can impact confidence in school performance based on inconsistent or overreaching consequences to first time and or accidental offenders. And then it could also be damaging to the community in the fact that if our equitable education for students and ensuring all parents have access to information and have the freedom to voice their concerns and advocate for their students could damage the district standing in the community. Can I learn more? And do I know enough to make a decision? So, some questions I still have is: has there been a formal complaint about the disparity in carrying out a zero tolerance policy? What is the legal fallout if we do divert from the established policy and have one punishment for James and another punishment for David? And then I don't feel like I have enough to make a decision just yet. I need to consider possible solutions and options for resolving this prior to making a decision. So, considering some possible solutions, option one is to do nothing. I allow David to continue to attend junior high, ignore the directive from the director of secondary education, and essentially say I'm going to accept a reprimand in my personnel file and continue with business as usual. I'm not going to go back and rethink the decision. Option two would be a comprehensive, all-encompassing action, which has many layers to it. So I would delay the expulsion of David and launch a more in-depth investigation where we're pursuing policy change and appealing to the district administration superiors to escalate this decision and evaluate if suspension paperwork should be completed. This decision, after consulting other people, would come from a committee rather than just Mr. Inman, and potentially submit to possible reprimand by the personnel file if it doesn't go the way Mr. Inman wants it to. And then option three, an intermediate strategy is to follow school policy and instructions from the district director, expel David and send him to the alt school, reach out to the alt school principal to ensure David's safety, and alert them of any possible fighting agenda from James's friend group, and simultaneously pursue policy change for the future that would maybe impact things in the future but won't impact David or this current situation. So pros and cons for each scenario. For option one, the doing nothing. The pros are following school policy. It establishes fair practice, protects the school and district from legal action, and it avoids blemished record for Mr. Inman's personnel file. The cons are that it could lose faith from families and community, that students will be given individual consideration according to their specific circumstances and needs. Option two, pros and cons. The pros for the comprehensive action plan would be that delaying expulsion will keep David in a safe and familiar learning environment and will demonstrate to staff, district employees, and David's family that the administration is trying to be fair and appropriate. It would involve all key stakeholders: SRO, district attorney, school principal, school board, director of secondary education, in collaboration on a policy that may become more culturally and ethically sensitive to the nuance of varying behavioral scenarios. It may impact policy change and reverse the director's instruction before Mr. Inman is required to follow through. The consensus decision will not fall solely on Mr. Inman. The cons of option two is that it will involve a lot of people and probably require board hearings and potential disciplinary action at the end of it anyway for not following explicit instructions from Mr. Inman's supervisor. If the decision of the collaborative team determines to keep the zero tolerance policy and make no changes, then the policy will be even more strongly followed, and they will just like dig into the trenches even more and not have any flexibility for student individualized situations. In addition, David would have to go to the alt school at the end of the appeal process anyway. Option three, those intermediate strategies. The pros for that situation is pursuing policy change may improve student experience in the future. Contacting the alt school principal will help provide multi levels of support and demonstrate care and concern for David's safety to the staff and family. And this will also potentially protect David from being targeted in a historically hostile environment. The cons for this option is that following the current policy will not affect David's current status but may help with future issues. He may face legal action or fallout from David's family on being placed in a punitive situation after a bullying incident. By he, I mean Mr. Inman. So the best option I think is option 2, the comprehensive action plan. I really did kind of go back and forth on that and struggle with this assignment a little bit, and I'll speak to that more in a little bit in the reflection slide. But this option 2 is the best option for both students and teachers. The principal would investigate all aspects of the incident again, just start all over, and alongside a team of administrators peers that also will review all the information to determine if both students are responsible for violating a school weapon policy or if bullying and manipulation were involved and only one student should be held accountable for the incident. Alongside this investigation, I would push for policy change that allows administrators to utilize a clear outline for circumstances and determine the best action based on specific aspects of the situation, where they're seeing the individual first and policy second in order to determine if a student should be expelled. And then gather real and tangible information to assist the admin team in making a collaborative decision that involves modeling better communication with students, families, teachers, and the alt school administrators. So in implementing this decision, it requires several steps. There's a lot involved there. So the first thing I would do is ask for 2 district administrators and 1 building staff volunteer to join a collaborative committee. For sure, one of those district administrators would be the principal at the junior high. I am the assistant principal. I would ask the head principal to be involved in reevaluating all the situations that led to this unfortunate incident. So first, after I gather my team, my collaboration team, I would investigate the incident again, interview all persons involved, also interview other teachers in the same area where David and James had their hallway exchange, ask district administrative personnel to weigh in on their opinions of the situation. Especially since Mr. Inman is a first year teacher, he may be unaware of some historical background involving maybe these families or the teacher that filed the complaint. Just seeking information for people that have been around longer and maybe know more about how to handle these types of situations. Next, second, I would evaluate and have some conversations with the district legal representative to consider all of the potential legal fallouts that might occur if either family decides to sue the district for discrimination if David and James are not disciplined in the same manner according to the district zero tolerance policy. Um, I think it's important to gather information about that. It won't necessarily direct our final decision, but it's important to be aware of what the legal fallout could be. And then third, evaluate and assess what is the driving um, motive behind the zero tolerance policy and what the pros and cons of the policy are and what the inherent goals of the policy are. Asking questions regarding if this policy is seeing the person first or the policy is important, and ask questions in a collaborative setting on if expelling David achieves the goals and inherent intent of the zero tolerance policy. And then we would communicate and implement. So we would communicate with all family members and students involved once a decision has been made and explain what aspects of the policy will or won't be followed. If the decision is made to not expel David, communicate with the principal at the alt school and the director of secondary education about the decision that the collaborative team has made. Follow up with a newly written policy to replace the district and student handbook, and then let your yes be yes and your no be no. And that's really important because if we change a policy, we need to make sure families know we're not going to just change a policy every time a parent gets upset about a decision made. We revised this one policy because it wasn't relevant to our current culture and our current student body, but we're not going to reevaluate every decision all the time. And then if the decision is for David to be expelled, he will be at the alt school longer than James due to the delay in the start of his 45 days. And then fifth, we would consider establishing collaborative meetings in a constructive environment that includes the evaluation of systematic learning and behavior goals in light of district ethics and equity goals, along with a comprehensive evaluative system that is influenced by social emotional learning, behavior trends in the building, and any multi-tiered systems of support that we can offer academically, that these trends will speak to student performance, their attendance, and their behavior. And then invite teachers to be a part of this discussion, but don't require it. So then my reflection on this scenario, I will just read it. At first, I was really scared of this assignment because I've never really thought of myself as an administrator or how I would handle big decisions that involve layers of conflict. However, after I got over the initial fear of the assignment, I reflected on some of our previous modules and thought through the aspects of making a decision that involved analyzing equity for all stakeholders. In addition, I considered how I could best conduct myself in these situations. I decided that consistency demonstrated through integrity and fairness would be my guiding principles as I contemplated all elements of this assignment. I think that although Richard felt sorry for David, he was also aware that David did not have an opportunity to be forthright due to how the search was conducted by the SRO officer and demonstrated true shock and fear regarding the unfairness of his situation. It is true that consistency with policies protects students and administrators, and it is true that changing a policy in the middle of a conflict can create even more issues. Even so, I still chose to follow my gut and make an attempt to advocate for David and develop a more inclusive policy that would be a better representation of the unique nuance of bullying situations in the existing zero tolerance discipline process. I came to this conclusion upon reflecting on Frank Bucaro's video when he said to always put people first in your decision making, and Mintz's direction to consider the needs of others before taking action. Collaborating with others to reinvestigate and then make a committee decision about the outcome of David's potential expulsion also helps to take the pressure off of me. And I had also felt a self imposed pressure to determine the appropriate actions to take all on my own. And after discussing this with my own administrator, I realized that administrators need to utilize their resources also in order to ensure ethical and sound decisions are being made. My principal told me about how he often has to bounce ideas and possible outcomes and decisions with our other administrative staff and a mentor from another district. This was a relief because although the role of being a principal involves a ton of decisions on a daily basis, we need to recognize that administrators should not function as an autonomous island making all decisions alone. I also realize that it's okay to to question a policy and reevaluate based on equity, inclusion, and ethical morality, as long as the process and the end result are fair, open, and involve a diverse committee of collaborators. This reevaluation and relying on others to help think through ethical decisions and potential conflict is not only helpful to stave off the professional burnout that we see, but it's vital to staying relevant as a building leader. That's it for my reflection. This is my references for some resources from this course I used with considering my case scenario and decisions. Thanks so much.